Welcome to episode 6 of the Wood Whisperer video podcast. I'm your host, Mark Spagnolo, and I am very excited. Why am I excited, you ask? Well, today my Festool dust extraction system is being delivered. You know you got it bad when you get excited over a vacuum cleaner. Anyway, I'm also excited today because we're finally going to do some woodworking. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Now there's no better place to start than at the beginning. And most woodworkers know that you won't get very far without properly milled lumber. A properly milled board will have each face milled flat and parallel to its opposing face. And each edge is going to be straight. It's also going to be 90 degrees to the adjacent face and parallel to the opposite edge. So why do we need square and flat lumber? Well, fine furniture starts with fine joinery, and you can't produce fine joinery without properly milled boards. You see, if we start with even slightly bowed, warped, or crooked boards, all of our reference points would be thrown off and all of our resulting joinery would suck more than my 5-horsepower Cyclone. With properly milled lumber, your cuts will be more accurate, your joints will be stronger, and your stress level will go way down, which all translates to better quality furniture and more fun in the shop. Now, every project I do starts right here at the jointer. It's the first step in a 4-part process that I use to mill up my boards. So before we get started, let's go over a few details.
Before jointing, I like to check to make sure that the fence is exactly 90 degrees to the bed. I usually check several locations along the infeed and outfeed tables. Next, I like to apply a coat of wax to the jointer's bed and fence. This will reduce friction and make the jointing process much easier. Be sure to use a silicone-free wax though, because silicone has been known to cause finishing problems down the line. Next, I adjust the depth of cut to no more than 1/16 of an inch. And lastly, I check for loose-fitting clothes.
Now, I'd like to just take a few moments to talk about safety. I will always try to provide the best example possible when it comes to safe operating procedure. I'll even mention safety tips whenever I think of them. But nothing substitutes for common sense. No matter how safe I am, ultimately it's your decisions in your shop that will determine how safe you are. To sum it up, read all your manuals, don't do anything stupid, and above all, use your common sense. Respect these tools. Look at what they can do to wood. Imagine what they can do to flesh and bone. Now I'd like to start by jointing one of these faces first, and we can't just randomly select a side and go for it. We need to actually look at the properties of the board and determine what the smartest way to approach it is. Now as I sight down here, I'm looking for a cup, and I do see there's a slight rocking motion here. I've drawn on here with marker to show you the orientation of the cup. The safest way to cut this and actually joint this would be to joint the bottom, put it so that it looks like a frown, because we have 2 points for the wood to rest on as opposed to 1 point like this where it can rock and pivot, which isn't a good idea. The second thing I want to look for is if there's a bow in the board. This one's pretty straight, it's not really going to be a problem for us, but if there were a bow, you'll find 2 schools of thought. Some people swear by running it as a frown, and some people swear by running it as a smiley face. Do a little research, find out what works for you. Both of them will get you there. You just need to know, at different lengths how each one is going to behave and make the right decision for yourself. The third thing is grain direction. I've gone ahead and actually drawn the orientation of the grain to show you, sort of exaggerate what I can't show you with the camera that far away. Essentially, you have to know that the blades in the jointer are spinning clockwise. Okay, so as we run this across there, we want to make sure that the blades are going with the grain so that when it knocks these little pieces of wood out, we're not going to get chip out. If we run it through this way, you can see they'll actually break off and create a much rougher cut. So always want to cut with the grain. So now that we know how to select the right face and the right direction, let's get it on.
I start by making marks along the board's face using chalk or a pencil. These marks will let us know when the face is truly flat. Using push blocks, I apply a moderate amount of pressure as I push the piece over the blades. Be sure to focus your pressure on the outfeed side of the table for best results. Once the face is flat, I mark it with a squiggly line so I don't confuse it with the other face.
Now that we have one true face, we could put that face up against the joiner's fence and true one of our edges.
I start by marking the edge with chalk as I did on the face. With the previously jointed face against the fence, I begin jointing. I like to think of my right hand as the pusher and my left hand as the featherboard that applies pressure downward and against the fence. Be very, very aware of the location of your hands during this entire operation.
So at this point, you might ask yourself, why not just do the other two faces on the joiner? Now that will make those other two surfaces flat and straight, but what it won't do is make them parallel and coplanar with the first two surfaces. We could essentially end up with a wedge-shaped board. Now by far the easiest way to achieve a coplanar surface on the other rough face is with the power planer.
With the previously jointed face down, I make my marks and send the board through the planer. For best results, I keep the cut depth down to about a 1/16 of an inch. Be sure to keep your fingers above the board at all times to avoid pinching.
Now the final step in the process is to true up our second edge, and the easiest way to do that is to go to our shop workhorse, our table saw.
At this point, I take off just enough material to clean up the edge. It's a good idea to use a push stick for added safety.
Now I've got a couple of tips for you that may actually save you from some future headaches. First of all, whenever you pass these boards through a planer, and even sometimes on the joiner, you can actually observe a phenomenon known as snipe. And that actually is a divot that's created at the beginning or the trailing edge of the board. It's really a result in most cases of a pressure roller issue, and that it actually cuts deeper initially, then once the whole board's under the rollers, it cuts nice and even, and again at the trailing edge, it'll cut a little bit deeper. So the easiest way to just circumvent the problem is to cut your boards about 6 inches longer than they actually need to be. And if you do wind up having snipe, you can just clip off the ends and there's no worries. The second tip I have concerns wood movement. You have to understand that the internal moisture content is usually greater than the moisture content at the outer edges. So when we plane these boards down, we expose fresh wood with a higher moisture content. This is especially true in woods that have not been fully cured or properly acclimated to your shop. Now if you mill it to final dimension in one shot, you may come back the next day to a very disappointing pile of warped boards. To avoid this disaster, mill your lumber down to size in 2 sessions. Don't go to final dimension on the first day of milling. Let it sit for a week and then go back and repeat the milling process. In most cases though, this can be avoided altogether by making sure your boards have a few weeks to acclimate to your shop's conditions. So what if you don't have all the big power tools? What if you're dealing with a board that's just too big for the tools that you do have? Let's quickly review some alternative methods for jointing and planing. Now the first and most obvious joining alternative is to use a bench plane. The longer the bed, the better. Now I'm by no means an expert on plane techniques, and I don't feel I would do you any favors by showing you my technique. So I recommend checking out an article in Fine Woodworking magazine number 119 called Jointing by Hand.
This technique requires a few simple tools: a router outfitted with a straight bit and a secure straight edge. Simply clamp your straight edge the appropriate distance from the edge and route away the rough surface. You should be left with a nice clean edge when it's all said and done. To join a rough edge on a table saw, I start by using double stick tape to attach my rough board to a straight piece of 3/4 inch plywood. As the straight edge of the plywood rides against the fence, the rough board is trimmed perfectly straight. Now it's pretty simple to make a homemade jig solely for this purpose, so do a Google search for some really cool ideas. To To join a rough edge on the router table, I start by double stick taping a 1/16 inch shim to the left side of the fence. Next, I align my straight bit with the shim. At this point, we've essentially created a mini jointer. Watch closely as the edge becomes perfectly straight.
Just as with edge jointing, the most obvious alternative for flattening a board is with a bench plane. Now there's a really good article posted on the WWA forum by my good friend Tom. You can copy the link below, or simply click on the link located in the Articles and Tutorials section of the Wood Whisperer homepage. Now I know at least some of you have confronted a problem like this before. You've got a nice, beautiful wide board, and you don't really know how to get that face flat without cutting it into smaller pieces that'll fit on your 6-inch joiner. Watch this next tip and you'll see how I take care of this problem.
To do this technique, I use a piece of 3/4 inch plywood as my sled. The piece should be no wider than your planer can handle, and the length depends on the length of the board you're trying to flatten. I lay the board down on a sled and determine where the high spots are. Using hot glue, I secure the board to the sled and alleviate any rocking motion at the same time. The goal is to completely immobilize the board. After letting the glue set, I give it one last test for stability. After several passes through the planer, I use a straight edge to determine if the board is truly flat. Looks pretty good.
Now one of the coolest ways that I know to flatten a board, especially if it's a really wide board that's just too wide for the planer, maybe it's even odd shaped and it's just not something you would ever send through a planer, is to use a router sled on a set of guide rails. It's a really cool technique and it's actually pretty simple. You have whatever board you're looking to flatten immobilized on a surface, kind of like we did on the last example of board flattening when we put it on a sled for the planer. We just need to immobilize this on a bench, use the hot glue, use some shims if you need to, just make sure it doesn't rock and it's very stable. Then you need 2 guide rails, which will sit on either side, and then some sort of a sled. Now this is just a solid piece of wood, but it's just as an example. You would drill a hole in the middle that allows your bit to come through. You would actually attach the router to this sled to immobilize it, and then bring this down so that the bit is touching the surface at the lowest point. And then you simply turn everything on. Obviously you want to wax these rails and just go back and forth until the entire thing is flattened. Because it can't move, you will get a flat surface. Now when I've done really, really large projects, for instance, experimentally I wanted to flatten my workbench without using traditional methods. I actually wanted to do it using this method. So I actually constructed this big guy here. This was the actual sled that I used for my router, and it fits inside here. The bit goes through that little hole, and I had a huge router sled set up with these big giant guide rails. I actually just used 2x4s and made sure they were milled perfectly flat and used that to do my bench, and it worked really good. Just make sure your sled is very rigid. You can see this one's completely reinforced and is not going to flex or bend under the weight of the router. Very cool technique. Now there's also an article on the WWA forum on how to do this exact technique. There's a lot of pictures there. It explains the whole process in detail, so you may want to check that out. Go to the link below, or you can find the link on the home page at thewoodwhisperer.com. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Wood Whisperer, and I hope you have a better understanding of proper milling techniques and why we need them. Now, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email us at thewoodwhisperer@gmail.com. And be sure to check out the website at www.thewoodwhisperer.com. And we always have new features and new articles that won't necessarily make it into the feed, so be sure to visit the site as frequently as possible. Our newest feature of the website, in fact, is the Wood Whisperer store. It's really just an Amazon.com affiliate site, but your purchases actually help out the show. Speaking of which, I'd like to take a moment to thank you guys who actually placed orders at the Wood Whisperer store and clicked on the ads on the homepage. Your support is really appreciated, and it allows me to keep these videos free. So again, thank you. Oh, and before I forget, I also added an email subscription service for those of you who prefer to receive the Wood Whisperer updates via email. It's pretty cool, so check it out. Just put your email address into the box on the Wood Whisperer homepage and follow the instructions. And be sure to join us next time when we finally make our first project. I was thinking something like this. It's my signature end grain cutting board, and it's a lot easier to make than it looks. I'll show you how on the next Wood Whisperer.